I'm Sariel Golom, and welcome to the first installment of Tablework, a TAPS video series featuring members of our show's creative teams and casts in a roundtable discussion of their scholarly and creative efforts for taking the production from the page to the stage. The phrase Tablework is a performing arts term for the early rehearsal period, focusing on the script and the source material and the analysis. And today's panelists will help us dive into TAPS's fall main stage production, which is Revival Millennial Remembering in the Afro Now, an original work by artist-in-residence AMARA TABOR-SMITH, which is being co-produced with IDA, Blackstage, and the Arts Intensive. So before we begin, I'll just ask our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm DAYONNA, and I'm a performer in the piece.
I'm AMARA TABOR-SMITH. I'm the director, lead collaborator, and choreographer for Revival.
I'm KAWANO, and I'm the costume designer.
And I'm Sariel Golom. As I said, I am a performer and one of two dramaturgs behind this project. So to get us started, AMARA, I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about the basic concepts behind the show and what sort of artistic forms our audiences will encounter when they come.
Yeah. So Revival is a devised work, dance theater work that will be site-specific. The piece was inspired by the actions of students in 1968, members of the Black Students Union that actually catapulted and inspired the founding of CBPA, which is the Committee on Black Performing Arts. The piece really is going to use multiple modalities, utilizing conjure art practice, which brings together traditional spiritual ritual and experimentation through performance.
So CBPA, as I understand, is what we now call IDA, the Institute for Diversity in the Arts. And IDA, along with TAPS, helped to bring you here to Stanford. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your involvement with them, how this project came about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I'll say is that CBPA actually still exists. It was the foremother for IDA. When IDA came into being, IDA went to the forefront, and CBPA continued to exist with leaders, people in leadership, artistic directors, which now I'm an artistic director of. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this piece, is to revitalize CBPA as a very vital space of experimentation and art for students.
So can you tell us a bit about the significance of the title, Revival Millennial Remembering in the Afro Now?
Yes. So as I was saying about revival, I was thinking about that word in multiple ways that you could use it. Revival from a spiritual or religious perspective of a bringing together or a coming together of people to, to worship or to, manifest other energy. Revival in the sense of bringing something back to life, which is what we're thinking about with CBPA, and also how CBPA in its origins was really engaged in the community, the outlying East Palo Alto community, and that's something that we hope to activate as well. I see this piece not being about something, but an activation of what it means. And remembering, thinking about, I feel like in this culture we have, cultural amnesia. And so it's very easy for, students who weren't around at the time to forget, that there was this entity or the history of how CBPA came to be. Oftentimes, I'm talking to students about CBPA and I'll say, how many of you know about CBPA? And few will raise their hand, but most of them will know about IDA. And just, that's indicative of our, amnesia that happens. If you don't keep something alive and keep reviving it, then, or remembering it, bringing it back together, then it can be forgotten. In terms of the Afro Now, so I also believe that culturally we talk a lot about the future, things will be better when, or, when this happens, it will be like this. And then we talk about the past, but we don't always emphasize the importance of our present reality and how what we do in this moment is, what we're planting seeds for the future. And we don't actually focus on the planting of seeds. We more value, what is sort of the vision of what will be as opposed to what we're doing in this moment.
Absolutely. I think that within both this remembering and the Afro Now, there's also a sense of speaking to alternative forms of calling upon history. So whether that's using dance or oral traditions to really embody history in a way that that the institution would have us otherwise forget about.
Yeah.
So Amara, this question's for you and also for Dana. Amara's practice of conjure art and the collaborative work that goes into something like revival, they're deeply intimate processes. So how does one begin to translate such a long and intimate creation process into a performance for a broader audience?
Dana, I'm going to let you answer that.
Okay, so this has been a journey. Amara and I have been working together for like 8 years. And so I can pretty much say that an idea comes somehow to this woman's head. And she starts telling me about social concerns, how she thinks about the interweaving of her philosophies, and looks at how we can blend that together in a way that's meaningful for people to heal from whatever injuries that they may have gotten along the way, for kind of resolving some of the social consciousness that we need today. And then from that, we usually just have a conversation. It's usually deep and long. And then her work begins to develop. And as her work begins to develop, because I'm very visual, I see things. I take her words and I see visions of how it can manifest visually to an audience. And I just try to say, you know what I see right now? What's flashing in my mind? And then Amara usually sits there and goes, what? Wait. and then she spins off into, and that would be great because of this and that. And so it's this kind of dynamic energy that goes back and forth that has been magical in many ways to spring off of each other conceptually. I'm hoping that, what I'm sharing that I see visually inside is something that continues to inspire her concepts. And then we just go back and forth, and it's this ongoing conversation that goes on for the whole time until we actually create the piece.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, the beauty of it is that as a collaborator, I'm always drawing on the energies of the people that I'm working with that help to inspire where the piece is going to go, where the work is going, how the work is going to evolve. So, Dana's work will often take, catapult whatever that idea is into a direction that I couldn't have imagined, had we not been working. And I will also say that our collaboration and the power of that has been through relationships, that mostly when I'm working in collaboration, it's about relationship building. We're not coming together to research together first. We're coming together to break bread first and get to know each other. I would actually like you, Dayonna, to talk a little bit about what your collaborative experience has been in this process.
Yeah, so I would say my first interaction with Amara was in conjure art my sophomore year. And the way that she works with this work, and also I think in class, like no matter what capacity people are working with Amara in, Amara has this really interesting superpower of pulling out the most amazing qualities in everybody in the room that makes you want to contribute. And it makes you realize, like, ooh, I do have something that, like, everybody in this space could benefit from. And in every class that I've been in, and even in this work, I have strong bonds with everybody who is involved. So I think, the basis is always relationship and making sure there's a sense of trust in the room, because the work that we're doing is extremely vulnerable. And we're also healing, and we're also, like, calling upon a lot of things within ourselves. So, like, we have to make sure there's a system of trust first. But then building on that confidence to, like, add something. It's extremely collaborative. Like, when AMARA says she's the lead collaborator, it is extremely collaborative. So AMARA will be like, this is the thing that we're thinking about right now. Everybody break off and find a movement and do some movement and come back, and we're going to introduce it to everybody. And then it'll end up in the piece. Like, it is the choreography that, like, we've all individually come up with is in the piece. So that's the most important part, is the building of trust, and also understanding that, like, we're all here to come with amazing things, and that we should all offer those things. So,
it's definitely a labor of many people's love. And you can see a lot of different voices in it. Dayonna, you're also contributing some design to this production. I would love to hear you talk about, working with Dana and how you've been thinking about, the design elements of this work.
Yeah. Well, number one, Dana is the GOAT. Like, Dana is the greatest of all time. I am, like, so privileged I learned so much from everybody at this table. But so I've been dibbling dabbling in my little, costume design, fashion design situation. So AMARA was so gracious, like I said, taking opportunities to pull out things that we're all exploring. And then, so I have been in collaboration with Dana to design an Egungun costume. And Egungun is a ritual stemming from West African traditional religions. It's a dance of honoring the ancestors. So this particular one, Egungun that we're designing, is about particularly honoring, like, our ancestors. It feels like very much like the cast from the cast. So it's basically about, collaboration on a piece. There's things that all the cast members have designed that are going to be on the piece as well. So, and honestly, I was scribbling, and then I handed it to Dana, and Dana, like, blew magic over it and made it something that was, like, visually appealing. Dana has also, I've learned so much in these few years. So.
That's fantastic. So what sort of design motifs and inspirations and references will we be able to see in the aesthetic layout of Revival?
Don't tell too much.
It's a secret.
Well, let me just say this interaction that I had with Dayonna was, she didn't just, scribble something down. She comes to me and she goes, can I share some things with you? And I look at this, and it's a whole rendering that she designed of this Egungun costume. And then it had, she was like putting all these little footnotes in there. I don't know exactly what color, but I want these things included. And then, let me show you the symbols for the Underground Railroad. And then she also, I guess you worked with the cast members and got their own symbology that relates to their ancestral roots and things that were important to them. So I think, to me, those motifs are the most meaningful. You can have a performance that has an overall message and it's strong, but being able to use costumes or some form of art, visual art, to be able to pull what people are feeling inside and put them out there in a motif, in a symbol, it may not mean a lot to the audience. The audience may not recognize it, but what's more important is that it's recognized by the people who created them. And they know that they have their grandmother's symbol out there, And I think that importance is something that you carry well beyond this performance, being seen, honoring your ancestors. That's really honoring your ancestors. So anyways, that to me is what's important.
Mm-hmm. I love that there are like levels of intimacy to the work, and that, I think this is very important to your practice, that it's not just that it's a performance for a public audience, but also that it's a deeply therapeutic process for the performers as well.
Yeah, I feel about that is that, again, coming back to, not doing something about something, but activating something, and that is really the basis for what I think conjure art does, is to, I always hope that these performances are more experiential. They're more experiences than they are, a performance for people, and that there's this borderline, but that we blur that line in ways that's not about putting audience on the spot. I'm not really interested in that, but how do we find these spaces of mutual vulnerability as a way to shift something? So, my work is rooted in, social and environmental justice. These are issues that are really important to me. So through the performance work, I'm always seeking to find ways to shift a vibration around an issue, as opposed to educate an audience about something. There's enough information out there for you to learn, but how does that change the issue? And that's what I'm interested in, is how do you make an energetic shift around an issue?
I'd love to talk more about the political and historical and ethical implications of the work, because, as you said, Revival celebrates and it reflects on this history of CVPA at Stanford, but also it takes its audience through a much broader history. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit, all of you, about how institutional history at Stanford, or in general, affects the show, and what are the histories that are not necessarily part of the official institution that we will, see come out in Revival.
Can I start? For sure. One of the biggest, I would say, themes is about kind of like the blurring of time. And a lot of times, as we enter a new, era, the amnesia commences, and we're like, okay, we're past that. Like slavery is over. We're past that. Let's think about, something else. But what's the most important? One of the most important things about this piece is that we're talking about how, like, everything is everything. Everything is happening at the same time. So when we think about, like, historical implications, it's about reminding us about how everything that has happened in the past is completely influencing us now. So no matter where we go, pinpointed, even like before 1619. All of those elements are really important when we're telling the story. So I would say that's what the historical implications are.
Yeah, you said that great. I think, if I was going to add something, it's maybe a little bit off the question, but thinking about how, as we talk about the Afro now, almost talking about the Afro here, like how do we think about where we are as, because again, when we can think about issues, we can think about them very broadly. We can think about them very specifically, but how do we do both? How do we think about recognizing that the place that we are has a history, and that all the pieces of those histories that sometimes even may seem unrelated are actually all connected. It's kind of like, integral medicine, or Eastern medicine philosophy that looks at the body as a whole thing, as opposed to your heart is sick, but the heart being sick might be connected to other things, and is connected to other things. So it's a body, and if we see, so I'm thinking about this work in the sense of how, all things are connected, and how do we actually remember where we are. And so even the site specificity of the work, or site responsive, is also saying we're at Stanford. We're not pretending we're somewhere else. We are actually here, and we're also connected to the somewhere else's. Yeah. I feel compelled to tell this very short story about Mae Jemison, the astronaut. It was an interview. I can't find the interview anywhere anymore. But someone asked her, you know, do you miss being in outer space? And she's like, I am in outer space. Like, we are on a spinning rock in outer space. And I think that what that represents for me is how we're always a part of this thing that sometimes we think is separate from us. Like, oh, that's over there, or the universe is out there. It's like, no, we're in it, you know? And how do we actually remember that, you know, everything is everything, like Dayonna said, and like that connection of all things. I think I went on a tangent. But
Necessary.
Dana, anything to add to that?
No, I think they have it very well covered.
Well, I guess just to close this out, I'd love to hear, Dayonna, you're a senior. This is your last year here. So how does this process and your time working with AMARA help you reflect on your experience here at Stanford? How do things come out to you about your experience?
So, fun fact, in high school, I did a lot of theater, like a lot of theater. And when I got to Stanford, I didn't do anything. I guess things just didn't, you know, call out to me. And I think it's because I wanted a different approach. And AMARA presents this like freshness and really grounds the fact that like art is not a complicated thing to make. I think sometimes, especially at these institutions, it seems like, oh, we're studying these, you know, famous people, Van Gogh and all this stuff, and it makes you feel like the art making process is unattainable.
Yeah.
So as I go out into, you know, the world past Stanford, I'm taking that with me out of anything. That like being an artist and creating things is number one communal, and it's also something that I do like every single day, and on every second, like art is being made right now. Yes. So that's the greatest gift I think that I'll like really, that's going to influence every move I make afterwards. So.
That's fantastic. I definitely think this process has reacquainted a lot of us with aspects of ourselves. Well, that's all we have time for today. So I just want to thank our panelists so much. This was so fabulous. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.